Okay, hello. This is the second lecture in a series of lectures on how the United States starts wars or in some other way manipulates the American Congress and public into joining an ongoing war. This war pertains with the Vietnam War, and it was manufactured through an incident, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, and the term that the government officials back then, the key policymakers back then, threw around was dramatic event. That they need a dramatic event. All right, and it's you'll see that this is very much similar to the Iraq invasion war. There's a lot of parallels. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to give you basically a lecture that I used to give to my college students, and it starts off with a general background on the Vietnam War, and then it gets into the details of how it was started. Okay, first thing I want to say is that both the Iraq invasion war and the Vietnam War were based solely upon a congressional resolution. There was not a declaration of war in both those wars. Now, another war in which a congressional resolution was important was the Spanish American War. Right? Now, sure enough, there was a later declaration of war, but the war was started by actions authorized by a congressional resolution. Okay? All right. Now, recall that for the Iraq invasion war, the Bush administration they bragged before their whole plan that they have a plan, a meticulously planned strategy to get the public in Congress and our allies to support attacking Iraq and to make it, quote, difficult to vote against it, referring to the Iraq War Resolution, which was the legal basis for war. Right now, this plan will probably never see the light of day. There's if it exists, it's classified. More than likely, it's been burned. But if it is released, it'll be a while yet. But however, in the case of Vietnam, well, this plan is on the books. You have declassified copies of this plan. It's called the 30-day plan, right? I'll just show you it real quickly. All right. So here's a plan. It was drafted by a guy named McGeorge Bundy, who was Assistant National Security Advisor, a key guy in the power group, the power elite of our country. But anyways, this is my I guess copying of the plan. This is my writing, but I took it word for word. All right. My chart shows the date in which it was planned to be conducted. First thing starting in mid-June, and then D-19. What that means is it refers to a D-Day. D-Day is the final day when you launch your big action, right? Launch first strikes here, right? Then you go back from there. D-1, D-3. You go backwards in time. You get a calendar and you plot this all out, right? Make little notes on what you're gonna do on which day. Not that difficult, right? Uh, so if you're a conspiracy theorist believer, right? Well, can you use a calendar? Is that hard? Can you write with a pencil? All right, it's not that hard. All right, so this is actually what was done, all right, these days, and this is my commentary on when it was done, if it was done. Here, when you see green, I don't know if it was done or if it wasn't done. For example, it says stall off any conference on Vietnam until D-Day. Well, I found no records on this, right? What does it mean to stall off? I don't know, right? Some of these things, but the majority of these things were done, the vast majority. So whenever you see it in gray, they were conducted, right? Conducted multiple times. And here's the thing, much more than this plan was done. All right, they didn't limit themselves to this plan. All right, so I would ask my students, at the very start of this, hey, has anyone ever heard of the Vietnam War? Right? And you'll be kind of surprised, even shocked at how few people raise their hands. For whatever reason, maybe people don't want to participate, but I'm thinking a lot of people, they slept through history class. Like, what? Right? So I would typically get about maybe one quarter of the class. That's about it. Sometimes less than that. Uh, all right, so the Vietnam War was one of our longest wars. If you take the starting point at our insertion of advisors for the first 2 years between 62 and 64, then you could say it was a 13-year war between 62 and 75. Last 2 years here were Vietnamized war, where it was U.S. support, but most U.S. ground troops were out by 73. But the overall war was about a 13-year war, right? Now, during this war, greater than 58,000 American boys were killed. Right? That's a lot, right? But the thing about it is that doesn't show the real devastation and suffering, because by the time of the Vietnam War, you had helicopter medevac, you had these forward hospitals that were very well, supplied with equipment and trained professionals, and they saved a lot of lives, right? So a lot more people, the ratio of people wounded to killed went way up. So this doesn't show that all the people who lost limbs or messed up in the head, psychologically from the war. Right? All right. Now, from the Vietnamese side, well, it's estimated that over 1.3 million Vietnamese were killed. All right. If you compare these numbers, that means for every one American boy killed, you got 23 Vietnamese killed, which is a pretty good, kill ratio, right? It's a testament to the power of uh, American industrial military might. But the thing about it is, we still lost that war with that, right? Now, as far as the amount of bombs dropped, we dropped 3.5 more tons of bombs in Vietnam, right? Tiny Vietnam, than all of World War II. Every theater, taken together. For example, European theater was huge, of course. North Africa, all throughout the Pacific, right, and Japan. Uh, we bombed hell during World War II, but we dropped 3.5 times more bombs on tiny Vietnam, and we still lost the war. Vietnam being about the size of New Mexico, roughly about the same. So think of all the bombs we dropped throughout the whole world, dropping all those 3.5 times more bombs in New Mexico. All right, and we lost the war. All right, so the war threatened to tear apart the U.S. I show here Kent State, the whole thing where 4 students were killed, right? But it was much broader. This is just a specific, isolated incident. There was a big split in our country between the die-hard, patriotic people, right? USA all the way, and we're always right, and kick ass on everyone. And then you had people saying this is a bad war, this is a whatever. I'm not gonna fight and die in this war. You had draft dodgers and so forth. That was a big fight. It was pretty heated. Um, Now, with all this turmoil, there was no declaration of war. With all these people killed, think about not just think about the number of bombs dropped, but think about the industrial production for that. Think about industrial production for all the vehicles, the aircraft. Think about all the support material that goes into war. It's a huge industrial endeavor, right? And there was no declaration of war. So, how do we fight this war? You need to have a legal basis for the war. It has to be authorized by Congress in some way, which is the legislative body. So, the sole legal basis for this war was a congressional resolution called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, based upon an incident that occurred in the Gulf of Tonkin. Here is the Gulf of Tonkin. Here's the South China Sea, which you're familiar with today. But the Gulf of Tonkin is this little body of water up here, right? And let's see, it authorized the president to use military force. Now, does that sound familiar? Does that sound pretty much exactly like the Iraq War, invasion war resolution? Well, it is. Usually these resolutions are passed through the Congress very, with very, I guess, little threat. That this is just to keep us safe. Don't worry about this. It's going to show that we're not a house divided. That we have unity within our government. It's not the executive, at odds with the legislator. Don't try to mess with us because we're unified. All right? They'll sell it that way, but really, it's a hot little ticket to war. All right? As soon as you get this in your hand, you can fight a full-on war for as long as you want. All right. Now, in 1964, the Johnson administration wanted a congressional resolution to expand the war. This is stated in multiple statements by multiple officials. I'll give you a couple here. Here are some statements from one meeting on June 10th, 1964. All right. The guy who was taking notes here, he was one of the members of the meeting who volunteered to take notes. He writes this, quote, Director McCone, who's director of the CIA, this guy here, said that putting U.S. troops on the ground in Southeast Asia would require a congressional resolution, right? Well, that's obvious. Everyone knew that, right? He reminded the group that the idea of a resolution arose when we were discussing how to deal with a communist reaction to an attack by us on North Vietnamese targets. Now, right after I read this, I ask every one of my classes, right, where I teach this, what does that mean? And you know what? Not a single class has ever been able to figure out what that means. It's mumbo jumbo for them, right? I don't know why. I mean, this when I read this, it just jumped out at me. What it's saying is, hey, we go and attack the North Vietnamese first. When they react to our attack upon them, right, we'll use their reaction as a threat to justify a congressional resolution, and we'll get Congress to pass it. All right. So another quote is Secretary McNamara. It says, quote, he's Secretary of Defense. Secretary McNamara suggested that in the event of a dramatic event, remember I told you that's a buzz term they all used, right? They're all using that, from Ross to everyone, right? In Southeast Asia, we would go promptly for a congressional resolution. He's not the only, about 6 other officials said the same thing. We need a dramatic event to get a congressional resolution, right? So what is a dramatic event, right? It's an incident. It's something shocking. It's an attack, right? Now, the big question is, well, how are they going to get one? How are they going to cook one up, right? And the answer is, in the terms of Vietnam, and it was in this case, you play what's called a multiple cognitive framework game, right? Now, it sounds pretty complex, but it's really very simple, right? I mean, anyone with half a brain can do this. All right, so the idea is this. Let's say you have 2 completely separate and isolated populations, like the population and government of North Vietnam, and you have the government and public of America, United States right here, right? Right? So what you do to play this game is you selectively expose each group to entirely different information, all right? As much as possible. Sometimes if it's in the U.S. press, but if it's, well, what you do is this. You wave in front of their face here, threats. We're going to attack you. We're going to invade you. It's going to be total devastation. And then you start building up your forces. You build up weapons. You change leadership, right? Getting prepared to attack. Sending all the signals, right? Intentionally, what is it called? Signaling your intent, right? And then to the American public, you do the opposite. You leak with time release of intelligence reports, right, that the communists are expanding. The communists are going to attack, right? Get the American public to expect a communist attack. You get the North Vietnamese to expect an American attack, right? And then you create an incident. You manufacture an incident in which there is, some conflict, some military attack, right? And then each side sees it as, proving correct their perceptions, right? See, that proves our point. Proof positive. We knew they're going to attack. This proves their, sneaky viciousness, right? Americans say, see, right? We knew this is going to happen, right? Right? So the idea is this. Here's a quick review. The information in our heads determines the way we see things, right? Especially if they're made salient. Now, there's many methods to controlling the salience of things, and that's part of manipulating perceptions, right? I'm not going to get into that. But you control what's in their heads and how it's salient, usually by timing. You know, that's why they have a 30-day plan. You got to time these at a certain time. You got to put these things together so they're all mutually reinforcing. That it's like bam, bam, bam. They're hammered one by, you'll see this pattern here. These are threats. You see how they're stacked together? You see how these threats here are stacked together? They're not spread out. Each of these becomes mutually reinforcing. Each of these becomes exponentially building. All right. So then you expose two different groups to two different sets of information or signals. Right. That's what we did. Sent signals. And then you create an incident. And when that incident is seen, because you had whatever's in your head determines the way you see it, right? I mean, that's part of it. Part of it is motivation. People are self-interested, self-serving, and they'll see things the way they want to see it, right? But it's also, the stuff that's in your head, right? Those are two key factors in the formation of perceptions, right? So then each group will see it in the opposite way, and then you get conflict, then you get a war. All right. So now I say these games are common to the CIA. The CIA, this is what they play in: controlling perceptions, manipulating perception, playing games. Right. This is exactly their bread and butter. All right. Don't think this like, it's impossible. You can't do this. No one's that smart. Yeah. No one's smart enough to buy a calendar. No one's smart enough to use a pencil. Make some notes. All right. So I want to show you kind of an overview of what was done before we get into the nitty-gritty details. All right. And so here's kind of the overview. Here is the D-Day, where you get a dramatic event. All right. You get an incident, and then you got to build up for it going back. Remember D-1, D-3, D-19, whatever, right? Right. So the idea is first mentioned in the government documents in a May 21st meeting, where this fella here, his name was McGeorge Bundy, and he was the Assistant National Security Advisor. And at this meeting, now it's a meeting of the National Security Council, which are the top, national security people. It's going to be the president, maybe the vice president, but not necessarily. But you're going to have Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State. You're going to have the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staffs. You're going to have each of the Chief of Staffs of the Air Force, Navy, Army, Marine Corps, whatever, right? Then you're going to have key assistants like you're going to have National Security Advisor and his assistant. You're going to have Secretary of State and his assistant, right, and so forth, right? All right, so that's the idea. It's a big shot meeting, and at this meeting, McGeorge Bundy is recorded as saying, quote, he said he believed that a major factor in the 1962 Cuban crisis had been the major movement of U.S. forces in Southeast U.S. Moscow knew something was coming. He wanted to know if any such visible signs would accompany the alerting actions of Op Plan 37. Those are the overt actions where everyone can see, or if they would not. Was the plan flexible enough to permit them to do so? So he wants to send these signals that led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. So to understand this, I think it's better to do a quick review of the Cuban Missile Crisis. All right. All right. I think I'll make this a little smaller for a second here. Fit more in. All right. So here's the Cuban Missile Crisis, October 1962. All right. Here's the United States. Where's my cursor? Here, United States. Here's Cuba. Only 90 miles separates Cuba from Florida. That's a short distance. 90 miles right there. All right. And the Soviets have installed nuclear missiles that close to us. right? I mean, think of yourself waking up and some morning in October, and you get up, right, put on your robe, right, you go outside, walk, and you pick up the newspaper, right, you open it up with a cup of coffee, and then you see front page, Soviet Union has nuclear missiles in Cuba, right? It's like holy crap, what the hell, right? Uh, just off our coast. I mean, that's pretty scary for American, for anyone, right? Missiles that close, nuclear missiles. Soviet Union, our nemesis, right? At best, that's just a provocation. Two, it's an aggressive action for sure. Three, it could be preparation for a nuclear first strike on the U.S. They're trying, right? Or it could be possible preparation for an invasion of the U.S. Now, I mean, this is a problem that's well beyond the Soviet Union at the time, and at any time really, logistically to do right. But Americans wouldn't see that; they wouldn't see the actual real requirements of this, right? It's a logistical impossibility for the Soviet Union, but this would be real in Americans' heads, right? Or we're looking at World War III right here, or better build a bomb shelter in the backyard. Now, if you think this is far fetched, this is what people did. They had real fear here, right? The whole thing, the Cuban Missile Crisis was pretty scary for people. All right. Now, from the Cuban and Soviet perspective, they saw it entirely differently. Remember, we were talking about multiple cognitive frameworks, how you're going to see it differently based upon what's in your head, right? Well, yeah, there were different things in their heads concerning this. Okay. So, one is this, right? The U.S. Backed and led an invasion of Cuba back a year ago, right? April of '61, called the Bay of Pigs, right? So already they tried to invade Cuba, right? Now, after that invasion failed, it did fail. The U.S. Kept up an ongoing operation called Operation Mongoose, which was ongoing attempts to sabotage the Cuban economy, sabotage your infrastructure, seed political unrest, right? Work through the presses, and then they had a program which to assassinate Castro, right? They're trying to assassinate Castro all the time, right? Um, okay, so then another key thing was in the middle of summer of 1962, right before the Cuban Missile Crisis in October, right? The U.S. Navy conducted two major naval operations, practicing real plans. There were U.S. Military plans to invade Cuba. Now, there was no green light or authorization to conduct these plans, but they were practicing these plans. All right. Now, the preparations involved two big operations. One was practice amphibious landings on an island where they would practice all the time called Vasquez, just off the east of Puerto Rico here. Small island that's, like uninhabited. So they would practice bombing the hell out of it with artillery rounds, just like a World War II D-Day type, amphibious invasion. Prepare the landing site, blow the hell out of it, and then land the troops with it, landing craft and so forth. So they had a big operation there, and then they had another operation involving practice with naval air forces, 400 naval aircraft. And if you know about carriers, the carriers back then, and really pretty much today, carry about 80 aircraft, right? 80, 90. And so what does that mean? That means that there were at least 5 carriers, all right? That's huge. That's like all the carriers on the East Coast. I'm willing to bet that's all Atlantic carriers. Right? Now, I don't know if they're all individual carrier battle groups, which would be monstrous, but even if they're all packed together, it's a huge force. All right. And then, in addition to that, is what's his face mentioned, McGeorge Bundy. The major movement of U.S. forces in the southeast U.S. Well, how you're going to practice it, landing all these forces, not just soldiers, but all their equipment, all their tanks and trucks and whatever. A lot is required logistically in amphibious assault, right? All their equipment, right? You're going to land. Well, what do you got to do? Well, you got to move them for where they're based at. In the southeast U.S., load them on ships. So this is the big movement he's talking about, right? Major movement of U.S. forces in the southeast U.S., right? And then the final thing that was in their mind that is not in the American public's mind is we already had intermediate nuclear range missiles right on their doorstep, right? We had Jupiter intermediate missiles in Turkey here and in Italy, right? So, I mean, from their perspective, it's like, man, who are you to complain? You got those missiles on our doorstep, right? So they're just evening things out. In their mind, they're just evening things out, right? Uh, Now, you know, I'm not trying to minimize the missiles in Cuba. They were significant missiles. Right? There were two classes of missiles. I forget their designations, but one of them was a little bit shorter range. But even still, with its range, it could hit all the major East Coast cities, from New York, Midwest and Chicago. Right? So it had a range, an arc like this. Now the other missile was even longer range. It's still intermediate. It's not intercontinental, right, from one continent to the next, but it could cover everything up to like Washington State. So it's whacking everything in California, San Francisco, Los Angeles, all the big cities there, maybe Seattle, right? All right. Now the key is here. Do you see how it is easy to have a difference in perspective based upon different information in your head, right? All right. Now, what's even more important is what Bundy says. Let's go back to what Bundy says. He says, oh, yeah, okay, so it was we sent signals, and that got Moscow to move, and then that created they put the missiles in, that created the whole incident, right? He wanted to know if we could do the same thing again here, right? If we can send those signals, right, those threat signals, in accordance with the plan called Op Plan 37 Alpha. That was the overt out in the open programs, right? Op Plan 34 Alpha. The other one was a covert black ops, secret ops, and they both played hand in hand. And in fact, they had a mutual effect, combined effect in this case, which created the incident, right? You'll see that coming up. All right, so he's saying, can we create a Cuban Missile Crisis type situation by sending signals in which, of course, the communists will be made to look like the bad guys, right? All right, so that's April 20 or May 21st. Very next day, May 22nd, right, Bundy sends a memo to President Johnson that a congressional resolution is being drafted. So the congressional resolution was passed here on August 7th. All right. Now, most people believe, like pretty much unanimously, they believe that this resolution was drafted in response to the Gulf of Tonkin incident here on August 4th, right? Which the second attack never really occurred, right? But it was believed at the time, So they believe that this resolution was drafted as a response to this, but it wasn't. The first draft was way back here. I believe there are 4 drafts altogether, right? First draft is being cooked up way back here, right? They're getting this puppy ready. So, and again, that's the hot little ticket to war. So May 24th, Bundy provides a 30-day plan and the first draft of the congressional resolution. So the resolution is on Johnson's desk, right? And also the 30-day plan. Now let's take a closer look at the 30-day plan. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because all that stuff is covered in the details here, and more so. They did more things than just what's on the plan, but we'll take a look at the plan, right? All right. So the plan was to send these threat signals. Here is the overall scheme of things, where you send some threats. You had a bunch of threats packed together here, a bunch of threats packed together here, right? You get them scared, expecting an attack, expecting an invasion, right? Then you start launching attacks. They actually launched attacks into North Vietnam here, so they're attacking another country. And then you launch a bunch of attacks here. 2 boat attacks, 2 air attacks. Then you send in a ship right where you attacked. A ship on a totally different mission with total no information about what happened, and they're sent right to where you just attacked. After all this buildup, we're going to attack you. We're going to attack you. We're building up to attack you. We're going to start a big war. We're going to invade you, conquer your country, right? And then you start attacking them. And then you send a U.S. ship on a totally different mission right where you attacked, right? And that created an incident. I hope you can understand it. Now, so I said this is the date in which the item was to be conducted. These are the individual items, and this is whether or not they were conducted, right? The first one, it says stall off any conference on Vietnam until D-Day. Right? I don't even know what stall off means. So I never found anything on this. So I leave question marks here. I don't know if it was done or not. Now this intermediary, it says, Canadian intermediary. Well, it says intermediary, right? Get a Canadian, and they use a Canadian. His name was Seaborn, so they did this. It says mid-June. Well, he was sent on June 18th. They conducted this, right? All right, D-19, get con to agree on start of South Vietnamese air attacks against targets to the north. Well, they started conducting this. They announced that they were conducting this on D-11. All right. It was open announcement saying that we're whacking you with airdropped commando sabotage raids, right? I'm sure they knew it because they're getting attacked, but they blab about it in the press, right? All right. Here, D-19, same day. Squeeze con to take certain steps. Well, I didn't find this out, right? So, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I couldn't find it. Another one, President spells out plans to go to congressional leaders, lay groundwork for appropriate expression by Congress of its support. You know what that is? That's a resolution. And I say question mark here, right? But they're getting this resolution ready. Congressional support means resolution. And this is May 22nd is the day Bundy said, hey, we're drafting this. And then May 24th is the day they submitted it. First draft. So in a sense, this was done. Groundwork of item 5, followed by implementing steps such as presidential speech or message to Congress to obtain appropriate congressional expression of support. This congressional expression of support means a resolution, which becomes a legal basis for war. So again, they had the first draft of the resolution by the 24th, right? And the speech itself was conducted on August 4th, 5th. I say that because Washington time, this is about midnight. Johnson was so urgent of the attack that he gave this nationally presented address about midnight. Okay, consult with Thai and Philippines to get permission for U.S. deployments. These are the pre-positioning of equipment and troops, right? Began in Thailand began on June 24th, right? June 24th, June 22nd in the Philippines, right? But these planes mentioned down here, the B-57s anyways, and they had F-100 fighter bombers, right? They started arriving in Vietnam in May 27th and June 22nd, were two big shipments of jet bombers, right? I don't know exactly when the jet fighters were there or got there, but they were there. The F-100 Super Sabres. And then it's release of an expanded Jordan report. This is an intelligence report. And like I told you during my lesson on how they cooked up the Iraq invasion war congressional resolution, when they release these intelligence reports, it's not to be your buddy and inform you, to help you. It's to manipulate you, right? So they plan to release this on D-17, and they actually conducted that on July 17th, which lines up pretty exact if you take August 2nd as D-Day, right? So that's what I did. Most things line up better if you take August 2nd or so as D-Day. They didn't do things exactly in those days, right? Now D-17 item is start moving U.S. dependents. This is a classic war signal. This is classic threat signal, right? If you intercept let's say a coded message that they're ordering the dependents out, well, even if you don't intercept it, when you see that they're moving them out, you know something's up, right? This is a classic war signal. The three classic war signals are: you change leadership from a civilian leadership to military leadership, right? You issue orders for the destruction of codes and code machines, and you issue orders to recall dependents out of harm's way because you're going to start a war, right? So this is a classic war signal. Now I have the question mark here because I didn't find in the papers whether or not this was done. You know, it could be done quietly. I don't know. Or it may not have been done at all. I don't know. So, but it's part of the plan. All right, direct CPAC to make preparations for action. Well, they were conducting these actions from May, right? This is the bombers, anyways, May 27th and 22nd. But they had big. Oh, that's the bombers here, including movement B-57s to Saigon. They came in twice on the 27th and the 22nd. All right. Khan makes speech demanding North Vietnam stop aggression, threatening unspecified military action. Well, yeah, this was done. It was done on D-15th, and what it was is Khan said, we're going to attack North Vietnam. His speech was nicknamed Bac Tien, which means to the north. We're gonna attack the north. All right. So he conducted this in accordance with the plan. And then it says, the next item is, well, Johnson backs us up in referring to Khan's speech, right? Informs the public, right? Action may come. Well, it was more tricky than that. I'll show you what it actually said, right? But this was conducted on D-9. It says D-3. Now, this is a 7-day difference. It was actually a 6-day difference. Right, 6 days after this, Johnson had this press conference, and he backed up what Khan said here. All right, I don't know if this happened. Khan announces that all efforts have failed. Attacks are imminent. You know, I didn't see this anywhere. It could have happened. And then you launched first strikes. This occurred on August 5th. So I'm gonna. That occurred also. All right. All right. So that's a quick review of the 30-day plan. Now you'll see that they did far more extensive, far more detailed things than that. All right. All right. So here's the overall plan. Right. This is where they said, hey, can we use threat signals? Then they start getting the resolution ready right away, and they have the 30-day plan right away. 30-day plan has all these threat signals, and they start doing them. Right. So the first item is May 27th. United States ship called the Corps arrives in Saigon with 20 jets, B-57 bombers. They're called Canberra bombers. Right here, twin engines. Right now, this is significant because it's a significant step up from what they had there already. Prior to this, for the past 2 years, between 1962 and 64, they had advisors, you know, a small force of about 15,000. And for the air arm of this, the operation was called Farmgate, right? They had advisors flying these planes, not, you know, regular Air Force pilots, right? And they're flying World War II quality type planes. So this is a trainer that came out after World War II, but basically its ability was World War II, a T-28, a trainer plane, propeller, prop plane, right? They're also flying these B-26s, which in World War II were A-26s, right? Again, World War II vintage, right? With advisors. Now they're going to U.S. regular Air Force pilots with jet bombers, right? So it's a threat signal we're building up. A couple days after this, on June 1st, Congressman Melvin Laird, who later on became the Secretary of Defense, right? He leaks to the press. Well, he didn't leak. He just told the press that the U.S. has war plans to attack North Vietnam, right? And this information was given to him by Secretary of State Rusk, right? And this is a typical method when you want to leak information that can lead to war. You want to create distance and separation from the people who are doing this, right? Especially the president. Now, that's an old method to start wars. That goes back, I've seen that going back to the Franco-Prussian War and the War of Italian Unification. I call it the peace persona method, where if you want to start a war, you got to make sure that everyone in your country sees that the head of state, especially, the king, the prime minister, the president, whoever it is doing everything they can to preserve the peace. All the while, they're trying to prepare and create a war, right? But you got to make sure it looks like you're trying to maintain the peace. Now that's an old method, right? And so to do that, one thing you do is if you start leaking things, well, you leak it through someone outside the administration. So they leak it to a congressman here. He's not even a Democrat. He's a Republican. He's chairman of the Republican Platform Committee, right? So quote, Republican Melvin Laird, chairman of the Republican Platform Committee, said today the Johnson administration is preparing to move against communist North Vietnam in the Southeast Asian War. Laird said in a radio interview, quote, the administration's position is to move north, and we are preparing to move north. I mean, you can't say it any clearer. This is a preparation that has been ongoing for several months. The administration plans to prepare to move into North Vietnam, and that's the important part of my statement, right? That's an attack and invasion of North Vietnam, right? That's laying out plans that we have these plans, right? All right. So the old trick is have someone outside the administration go public with it, right? Right, but someone credible. Now, I've seen this done by us, Pearl Harbor, right? The first leaks that the administration is going to cut off oil was sent through a congressman. I forget his name, right? But that was in May. There were leaks. May about 6 and May 26, right? We're going to cut off oil, right? Get the Japanese all jacked up there because they don't have any oil for themselves, right? Now, another example is the first Gulf War, right? There were 3 green lights given after Saddam Hussein put 100,000 troops on the Kuwaiti border. Right after that day or next day, it was right after. You had 3 green lights given in the subsequent next days, right? Very next day, 1 green light. The first green light was given by Margaret Tutwiler, the State Department spokesperson. I mean, who's Margaret Tutwiler? Who's the State Department spokesperson? That's like a nobody, right? Right? But you know that she herself is not making policy, right? This is marching orders she's following, right? And in fact, it was James Baker who told her. But it's not just James Baker; it's the whole administration, right? They're coming up with this, right? But you send it through like you create distance between, any action that may lead to war and the head of state. Again, that's called a peace persona. All right, you'll see it in action here. Johnson is using the peace persona here, and he does it again later in June, right? About 10 days after this. So then it's reported in the New York Times, and I believe this was reported in 1971 when they released the Pentagon Papers, right? It wasn't 1964. I don't have the date here, but I have it. It's New York Times, right? Well, you can look this up. You can Google. Well, let me not Google it, but you go on New York Times index and search this. Right. Anyways, so on June 4th, Mr. McNamara, Secretary of Defense, directed the Army to take immediate actions to pre-stock weapons for possible use in Southeast Asia. This is the big show of weapons shipments, right? That's a threat signal. The administration also focused publicly through June and into July on its military pre-positioning moves. Shipments to be given extensive press coverage. You blab, blab, blab. So everyone knows this. You get a bullhorn. Tell everyone these weapons are coming. Right? Pouring weapons into a country in the region and then blabbing about it is an obvious threat signal. Now, this is part of the plan. D-minus 17. All right, that's a pre-positioning. Part of the plan. Then June 18th. Remember we said right at the top, one of the first things was get an intermediary, and they said, well, is it Canadian? Question mark. Well, they got a Canadian. They got Seaborn, this guy. I don't know much about him, right? But he delivers a prepared statement threatening expanded military action. Quote, in the event of escalation, the greatest devastation would, of course, result on the DRV. That's the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, which is communist North Vietnam. DRV responds, he, Seaborn here, is an errand boy bearing threats of an expanded war. So did they get the message across? Did they get the threat across? Yeah. Was that part of the 30-day plan? Yeah, right? Mid-June, right? Did it occur mid-June? Yep, right on plan, right? All right, threat signal. And it was part of the first wave. Remember I said the first wave are here? Now look at these. They're packed together. They're meant to be mutually reinforcing, mutually, I guess terrifying, right? Right? And then there's another group packed together. This is no accident, right? Then you have the actual attacks here. You build them all up, you get them all like jacked up, and then you start attacking them. Of course, these attacks were covert. No one in America knew about these. Right? All right. All right, so June 18th, President Johnson publicly announced a promise tonight to open an offensive, all right, in the pursuit of peace, right, with the use of overwhelming military power, right. So it's a threat signal, right? You got the head of state saying we're gonna launch an offensive war against you with overwhelming military power, but for American consumption, you say for the pursuit of peace, calm our fears, whatever, right? Get us to ignore this. We're just going to do something for peace here. That's all right, right? But for the Vietnamese, thinking of the greatest military power in the world, saying we're going to kick your butt bad with, our utmost overwhelming military power. Well, this is gonna build up some fear here, right? All right, now the thing about it was they're cooking up this war all along. How to get this war, how to get this congressional resolution, and at the same time, Johnson is running for president. He wasn't elected president. He was appointed as from vice president after Kennedy was shot, and then 64 is going to be the first election, in November. But this is what, June, all right. So he's campaigning, and he campaigned on a peace ticket. In fact, I can remember exactly, pretty much, well, I don't know word for word, but pretty close to what he exactly said in one of his campaign speeches. He said something like this. I saw a video of this. He said, in his Texas drawl, I can guarantee that American boys will not be fighting a war in Southeast Asia that Asian boys ought to be fighting, right? And at the same time, they're preparing to get a congressional resolution to put American boots on the ground. All right. All right. Now, the thing about it is, again, this is peace persona. You got to maintain the perception that you're doing everything for peace. All right. He ran on a peace ticket. Now, I said that FDR, my favorite president of all time. No one's even close to FDR. For the most part. But he did the same thing in 1940, going into the 40 election. All right. Okay. So I know people are going to say, what? He didn't cook up Pearl Harbor. Well, just wait and see, okay? All right. You're not getting things from U.S. history. Stuff right in front of your face in U.S. government documents, right? They kind of keep things from you here. All right. So now William Bundy, June 19th, next day. This guy was Assistant Secretary of State. He's also McGeorge Bundy's brother, fellow bonesman from that power club. I was talking about. I'll give you a lesson on that. He threatens use of U.S. forces to attack countries to the north. Right? Remember, Melvin Laird said we're going north. Right? This is a total reference to North Vietnam. It is not, China. It is not Mongolia. It is not Russia or Soviet Union. Right? What's right to the north? North Vietnam. That's a total reference to North Vietnam. We're going to use U.S. forces to attack North Vietnam. All right, then June 20th, press release report here on the shipment of U.S. weapons to Southeast Asia. Right? Remember this? Remember McNamara's plan to make sure it got wide publication, extensive press coverage here. Quote, extensive press coverage. Right? June 20th, another report in the press. The United States is shipping tanks and other military equipment to reinforce stockpiles in Thailand. Defense Department said today. So that's published by the Secretary of Defense's office, right? And we're not. This includes tanks, right? This includes jet bombers. This includes jet fighter planes, right? June 22nd, it's reported another shipment of B-57 bombers. Remember the first shipment was on May 27th? Well, June 22nd, you got another one going in there. These bombers. 20 bombers here, and probably another 20 bombers here. All right. Okay, that's all. This is part of the 30-day plan. D-minus 17, D-minus 16, D-minus 17, right? And then on June 22nd, same day, there's a report on a new system of 5 air bases, right? Da Nang was already serving as a base for U.S. F-100 Super Sabre jet fighters. It's a jet fighter bomber here, used initially for tactical air support, but then it was basically superseded by the F-105, which could take more battle damage. But anyways, the Da Nang base will tie in with other Air Force installations at Tan Son Nhut, Ben Ho, Nha Trang, and Udon. That's 5 bases, right? Quote the bases, okay. All right, that's New York Times. Okay, threat signal again. And then on June 23rd, there's a report that General Maxwell Taylor, the former chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, the top military man in the country, has replaced Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. as ambassador of Vietnam. Right, so the top leadership post in a foreign country is not military; it's a civilian post. Right, you now fill that with the top military man. Right. So remember I said the classic war signals are you switch leadership to military leadership, political leadership, you destroy codes and code machines, and you order dependents out, right? Well, we did this. We didn't have to worry about the Vietnamese taking our codes. I mean, that's not going to happen, right? But we did 2 of these, right? Or this was part of the plan anyways. I don't know if this was done, right? But this was done, certainly. All right. Now, not only was he the top military man in the country, he was a guy that instituted U.S. military forces into South Vietnam in 1962. So he was a guy who installed those forces there. Now he's being made the top leader, right? So I say here it's very similar. Now, you know, when Japan was preparing to attack Pearl Harbor, we intercepted all these messages here. We knew that General Tojo replaced the civilian Prince Kanoe cabinet. We knew that there was 5 messages we intercepted that they ordered code machines, destroyed, and code machines destroyed, and they ordered dependents out. There were 2 messages on dependents out. All right, so these are classic war signals, right? And we're sending them. So this is how the communists responded. This is the Soviet press paper, Pravda. Quote, Pravda reiterated today Soviet statements that the appointment of a military man as United States ambassador in Saigon indicated the Pentagon might be intending to extend the war in Asia. So yeah, they're reading the signals correctly, right? They're meant to threaten them, and they're being threatened, right? So the signals are working. Now I have a brief comment on Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. Remember I said the Bundys are part of the power group, right? The key power group here guy was a guy named Harriman, who I don't talk about in this lesson. He was the #1 key central figure. But another guy was Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. from the East Coast Power Club, right? He was grandson of Henry Cabot Lodge, who was critical in getting the Spanish-American War congressional resolution, right? He was also, remember we talked about Guatemala recently? He was a major shareholder of United Fruit stock, right? Anyway, that's just an aside. Okay, June 23rd, Bangkok, two United States Navy, quote, 2 United States Navy ships loaded with military equipment for American stockpiles docked here tonight. 4 more were scheduled to follow, right? So it's not just 1 or 2 ships. We're sending a bunch of ships, packed full of stuff. June 28th, President Johnson said today that the United States, when necessary, would not hesitate to risk war, quote, to preserve the peace. So this is for North Vietnamese consumption to get them all jacked up with fear. This is for American public consumption too, to maintain the peace persona, right? All right. July reports Da Nang Air Force Base. July 10th reports Da Nang Air Force Base site a well publicized Air Force Day is one of the network of Air Force air bases recently developed to serve as a coordinated strategic system. Right, you get 5 bases all set up. Right, it's kind of like you know duh, they're getting ready to do something. All right, so that's the first wave. That's the first wave of threat signals. Now we're going to get to the second wave, starting mid-July here. Again, all packed together. All right, July 19th, General Khan, who is a leader of South Vietnam, this guy here, declares the start of a campaign to march into North Vietnam. Khan leads a rally with shouts of Bac Tien, right? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right in Vietnamese, but it means to the north. Right? We're heading north, right? Now, prior to this, and I read, the New York Times primarily, right, for over a year before, prior to the August incident, right, going back, right, and Khan, here and there was saying, I think we want to attack North, but we're not going to do it unless we get, assured U.S. support. For example, right, here's May 27th, it's reported, quote, Khan insists on ironclad U.S. support before attack on North. Nguyen Khan repeatedly opposes expansion of war to North, would insist on ironclad guarantees of U.S. protection and support, including use of U.S. combat forces if necessary before considering it. So I'm not doing this unless I get, I'm not. He's repeatedly saying I'm not doing this unless I get absolute U.S. support for doing it. Then now suddenly he's saying, hey, we're going north, right? Now, according to the 30-day plan, he's meant to give this on D minus 10. He does it on D minus 16th, actually, right? This is a little bit ahead of schedule, right? But according to the plan, 7 days later, Johnson backs up what he says in a speech, and 6 days later, he does. You'll see that coming up here on July 25th. Okay. So July 19th, commander of the South Vietnamese Air Force, quote, Key told news reporters that South Vietnamese planes had airdropped combat troops into North Vietnam for sabotage operation. This is D-minus 19. You make attacks on North Vietnam from the air. So they're dropping in commandos from the air who are conducting sabotage raids into North Vietnam. Well, this is a clear attack on your country. Think of let's say Russians flew over our country and dropped commandos and were blowing up bridges and power stations and whatever. We'd go crazy over that, right? So it's a threat. And this is the leader of the South Vietnamese Air Force. He announces it. 19 July, he, Assistant Secretary of State William Bundy, brother of fellow bonesman McGeorge Bundy, who wrote the plans, right, also said that we are going to drive, quote, we are going to drive the communists out of South Vietnam, even if that eventually involves a choice of attacking the countries to the north, right? When he says he's talking about North Vietnam again. He's being a little bit, coy, but no one doubts that this is North Vietnam. Evidence the provocation plan is working, right? So this is July 19th. North Vietnam asked the Soviet Union and Britain, who are co-chairmen of the Geneva Conference on Indochina, to, quote, restrain the United States to prevent further deterioration of the situation in South Vietnam and Indochina. This extremely serious situation has arisen because the United States government's deliberate attempts to rekindle the flames of war in the area. That's the way they're seeing it. A North Vietnamese note dated July 15th asserted the note charged that the United States was not only, quote, stepping up the aggressive war in South Vietnam, but also plotting to expand to the whole of Indochina, thus creating an extremely dangerous situation in the area. Right? It sounds like an exaggeration that, it's not just South Vietnam, but Vietnam, but yeah, we had operations in Laos and Cambodia. They're covert operations where, a lot of it was CIA run operations, but we're conducting that. So it's not that much of an exaggeration. It's not going to include Thailand because Thailand was solidly in our corner. All right, 20 July, the United States Department said today that the possibility of an attack on North Vietnam was in the realm of contingency planning. So the State Department's getting involved. Well, this is State Department here, William Bundy, right? And it can be discussed at any time. 20 more threat signals. July 20th, the South Vietnamese government releases a public statement affirming Khan's cry to the north. So one day later, the government says we're backing what he's saying. The South Vietnamese government called today for an increased war effort to liberate North Vietnam. All right. So when you say liberate North Vietnam, well, how are you going to do that? You're going to call from across the border, hey, right? Quit being communist. All right. No, you got to invade them, conquer them. So this means invasion of North Vietnam, right? From communist domination. The declaration said, quote, the government and entire people of Vietnam will step up the war with determination until total victory liberates the whole of our national territory. All right, which requires invasion of North Vietnam. All right, so threat signal. South Vietnam calls for increased war effort to liberate North Vietnam. Okay, another report on that. July 22nd, the commander of South Vietnamese Air Force confirmed today, that's key here. Combat teams had been sent on sabotage missions inside communist North Vietnam. So we're launching attacks into North Vietnam. Now, these are not just South Vietnamese. These are the concerted MAC-V operations under Op Plan 34 Alpha. These operations were scheduled. There was a monthly schedule, and it was approved by the Pentagon and the White House, right? So they're sending in now operations, and these were in accordance with D-19 on a 30-day plan. So he says Vietnamese pilots were being trained for possible larger scale attacks. Teams have entered North Vietnam by air, sea, and land. More infiltration teams are undergoing training. Colonel Key said, we could go this afternoon. I can assure you that all North Vietnam would be destroyed, but Hanoi, that's their capital, would certainly be destroyed. Right? All right, so that's meant to be a threat. So remember I said D-3, 7 days after. Well, this is actually 6 days after Key's speech. But at a presidential news conference, the question was asked him. I'm willing to bet that this guy was positioned there to make sure he asked the question. Mr. President, are there differences of opinion between the United States and South Vietnamese officials on the question of attacking North Vietnam? And if there are differences, what are they, please? Answer. The answer is no. And I stated it earlier, and I repeat it. Now, this is very deceptive because Americans probably have no idea what Khan said about attacking North Vietnam. So when he says the answer is like, what? I don't know. Forget about it, right? But to the North Vietnamese, they know that Khan says we're going to invade the North. So now you got the president saying we're backing him, right, for invasion and attack on the North. So this is protecting the peace persona because it's like, for Americans, like, what's he saying, right? July 25th, the Joint Chiefs. Oh, by the way, I believe this is New York Times report in 1971, after the Pentagon Papers were leaked to them, right? The Joint Chiefs proposed airstrikes by unmarked planes flown by non-American crews against several targets in North Vietnam. This actually occurred, right? There were 2 attacks into North Vietnam, including the coastal base for Hanoi's flotilla of torpedo boats. Now that occurred by boat. They didn't attack the torpedo boat base, but they attacked the island, right? So the airplanes attacked other places, but this island was attacked by boat. I'll show you that in a second. So this was done. Now I'll show you right now. All right, so here are 2 islands that we attacked. U.S. planned scheduled attacks, right? Part of our Plan 34 Alpha, right? One was Han Mai. There's a torpedo boat base here. So North Vietnamese torpedo boats here. That was attacked by boats, though. These boats here, right? This island was attacked by boats. The air attacks occurred here. There was one at Nam Cam here, and there's one way up near the Laotian border, right? So North Vietnam kind of blossoms out kind of like this, like a mushroom here, right? And so Laos is somewhere over here, right? Laos border. The town is called Noonday. That's where they attacked by air. Right? So that's proposed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and that was actually conducted on between the first and the second. Right? Two airstrikes, one on the first, one on the second. The boat attacks, two boat attacks occurred on the 31st. Another boat attack occurred on the 4th. So there were 5 attacks altogether surrounding the USS Maddox being sent into the Hornet's nest after all these attacks are made. All right. July 30th, quote, Assistant Secretary McNaught. This is again from, oh yeah, see 1971. This is basically Pentagon Papers leaked to them from Daniel Ellsberg, right? Okay, Assistant Secretary McNaught sent the Joint Chiefs Memorandum to Secretary Rusk on July 30th. The study reports that the studies of the Pentagon Papers, the same day that a chain of events was to unfold that would make it unnecessary to carry out the Joint Chiefs plan, even if the president had wanted to accept it. So now, what was that chain of events? So here is a chain of events, the actual attack. All right. So what I'll do is I'll read this to you, right? And then I'll show you pictures of what happened, and then I'll show you the big picture. I'll just start here, okay? So July 31st, just after midnight, 0045, right? U.S. scheduled and planned covert boat attacks are conducted along the North Vietnamese coast on these islands, North Vietnamese islands, as part of Op Plan 34 Alpha, which are the secret black ops, attacks. 4 U.S. supplied attack boats departed Da Nang, and 2 of them, PTF 3 and PTF 6, arrived off Han May at 12:21 local time on July 31st, and proceeded to bombard it with 57 millimeter, 40 millimeter, 20 millimeter cannon rounds. The other 2 boats arrived at the same time off Hannu, and likewise bombarded Hannu. Right? Quote, in this attack, the first standoff bombardment conducted during the 34 Alpha campaign. Right? I think this is from Galloway here. Or maybe Meralda here. Yeah, this is from Galloway, this is from Meralda. The 2 boats destroyed a gun emplacement and a number of buildings. PTF-2 and PTF-5 arrived off Hannu at 12:37 local time. Both boats shelled a communication tower, then shifted their fire to other targets on the island. Right, so there are 2 attacks, right, on various stuff on the islands. Now I'll show you a different pictorial way of showing this, right? So these are the 2 classes of boats. There were 2 nasty boats, nicknamed. These are 2 swift boats, right? I don't know their official designation as far as, mark numbers, whatever, right? But that's nasties and swift, right? The first attack, one of the attacks on Han May, and here's the map of the Gulf of Tonkin. This is water here. This is the coastline, so this is land over here, right? Just off land, there's 2 islands, Han May, Hannu. Both had military facilities. This one is special because it has a torpedo boat base, North Vietnamese torpedo boat base, right? Which could be a threat to a U.S. ship that's sent close to there, which is what they did after they bombed it. You have 2 boats attack Han May. You land commandos, and they blow up targets through sabotage, right? But, however, they were spotted by an enemy patrol boat that was out there, and so it gave the warning, and they couldn't land these guys. So they took this boat under fire, sank it, and they scrubbed the landing. But instead, they sat offshore and bombarded with the U.S. Navy book, the official U.S. Navy history of it's a Blue Jackets, Department of the Navy book, printed in Washington, which I got this map from. All right. They said they bombarded Hanne with over 750 cannon rounds. So they're doing their best to put a licking on this target here, whack him with over 750 rounds, cannon rounds, and then on Hannu, same plan. 2 boats, land commandos, blow up targets, but again, their alarm was alerted, so they had to scrub the landing, and they sat offshore, bombarded with cannon fire, destroyed radio station, and some defensive positions. All right. Key thing is you're stirring up the hornet's nest. All right. Now these boats departed, and 8 hours later, less than 8 hours later, all right, a U.S. warship, USS Maddox, begins a DeSoto mission. Now, they had no idea that these attacks occurred. All right, okay, but 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 they just got whacked here, and then they're going to get whacked in a day or so by the air. 2 air attacks on the first and second. All right. So just 8 hours after these attacks here, okay, the USS Maddox starts what's called a DeSoto mission. Now, to briefly explain the DeSoto mission, it is an intelligence gathering mission, and it's multifunction, right? You gather information on defensive positions on shore. You gather information on whatever, maybe depth soundings or coastal features, whatever, right? But a key thing that they're meant to gather is signal intelligence, right? And the specific signal was the fire control radars for the guns and missile batteries on shore, right? So to do that, the Maddox had to be mildly provoking, nothing big, but just enough to like be a pain in the butt that they light you up with their, they lock you on and light you up with their gunfire control radars, and you know that they have you locked up, right? So it's meant to send a signal here, but the thing is, you're meant to do that because you're meant to give away your signal, and they would record the gunfire control, frequencies and signals, right, for the gun control radars, and then you take that back to the United States and you develop jamming. So the next time they try to light you up and lock you on, well, you just white out their screen so they can't see a thing. All right. Okay. Well, the car just drove by, making a lot of noise. Okay, so that's the idea here. Now, to do that, you have to be mildly provoking. You go close to shore, fairly close to shore, but you steer in between, in and out of the local traffic. The North Vietnamese commercial traffic, the junks going, the fishing boats, right? Just kind of being a pest, and you're trying to get these guys to light you up, right, with their gunfire control radars, right? So they're being mildly provoking, and then. But look at where they're sent. Here's Point Alpha, here's Point Bravo, Point Charlie, Point Delta. Here's Han Nu, here's Han Mei. You're zooming right past where they attacked, where they whacked. Then you're zooming real close to Han Mei, right? Straight up here. And they got a torpedo boat base here, right? So what I'm saying is, if given the fact that you just whacked them, right? You can easily be mistaken as part of the same attack or as part of a preparation for an amphibious invasion, intelligence gathering for an amphibious invasion. And sure enough, we had been saying we're going to invade you, right? We're gonna attack you. We're going to go into Vietnam. So it's not far fetched. And these guys were all jacked up already, right? They're jacked up because of a planned sequence of threat signals. So you jack them all up. We're going to attack you. And then you attack them. Attack them here. And as the ship's going up here, as they're going up in this mission, you attack here and you attack on the near Laos, right? So you have 2 boat attacks, 2 air attacks, 2 boat attacks right before they get in the way, and 2 air attacks while they're on this mission, right? Don't tell me they're not setting these guys up. Now, what happened is, and I don't know why I'm getting a little tired. What happened was, as they're going north, the overall senior commander here was Captain Herrick. He's in charge of the DeSoto mission, right? And he's monitoring the North Vietnamese radio traffic coming out of Han Mei, and they're translating it and they're saying they believe that the Maddox was part of the same attack, right? They got whacked with 750 rounds, right? And they're hot, and they're going to send out torpedo boats to attack them, right? So what he does is he does a 180 here. He hauls ass out of there, right? But then he calls and calls for orders, right? They say go back to Han Mei. Well, it looks like he skirts around it. He's going up to Point Delta here, but then he's ordered, back to Han Mei. And as he's heading towards Han Mei, where they have a torpedo boat base, where we just whacked them, right? 3 torpedo boats come out at high speed. He turns tail, runs the other way at high. No doubt he's going flank speed as fast as he can go. He's got his aft 5-inch guns lighting up, shooting rounds at these boats coming in. He calls in air support, and there was a flight of A4 Skyhawks. Neat little plane. Anyways, the flight is commanded by a famous, hero, especially at the Naval Academy, a guy named Admiral Stockdale. He was a commander at the time. He's leading the flight in, and they fire at the boats, right? They missed with all their Zuni rockets, right? But they got hits with a 20 millimeter cannon fire, right? And from what I read, one boat was sunk, one was damaged, one made it back all right, right? I'm not sure if that's accurate. It's kind of what I remember, but that's less important. So they got some hits on these guys, and then they got out of there. They hauled ass out of there. All right, so that's about midnight right here. Right about here. It's 2400 local time, right? All right. So what happens is this. Now, the Maddox is then ordered back in, right, with another ship, the Turner Joy, here. So 5 hours later, almost right after, they say, you go back in. They're heading back in right here, okay? All right. They say complete the mission, right? Go to these points. And they got to finish up Point Oscar, November, Mike, and Lima here, right? But they're kind of skirting away, but they zoom past Han Mei, right? It's like, I don't want to say it, but it's almost like nah. After you whack them, after they come out, right? You zoom past there, right? And then they skirt off to the away to the east here, heading south. Heading south, southeast, and then right about here. This is a rough estimate. I don't have the exact location, but it's roughly where they would be at 0000, local time, right? There's another boat attack at so 2 more boats attack Vinson right here, okay. So as these guys are underway in the second mission, you whack them again with a boat attack, right when they're skirting around you again, right? So then they make a loop and come around here again, and they zoom past Han Mei again, right? Then they had directly due east here, 090, and right about here at 2041 local time, Captain Herrick believes he has radar contact with 3 hostile boats, right? He changes course to 160, right? And that's like heading this way, right? And he's trying to get out of there. All right. Now, but what happened was this. I'll give you a little bit of background. So this is the second attack, which never really occurred. All right. On August 4th, a storm rolled in like a squall. Big storm weather. It means big waves. Right. Now that has 2 effects. That affects both your radar, what you can see out there. It also affects sonar and what you're hearing out there, right? So at 2041, Herrick believes to have picked up radar contact with torpedo boats at 26,000 yards, right? That's what it's reported in books that I read, right? 26,000 yards. Now, I know, from my experience in the Navy that you got big weather here. You're lucky to see Jack, right, with the big waves, a small torpedo boat. Now, not just that, at 26,000 yards, right, this is right at the very fringe of any possibility of getting radar contact, because the destroyer mass, you give a destroyer mass, I don't know the exact mass, I estimated like 120 feet high, where you have your radar antenna out here, right? right? Then you take the freeboard of a torpedo boat, about 7 feet, right? Right? You're lucky to have radar waves bouncing off the top of that boat. With the curvature of the Earth, right? Right? You know, so it's like virtually impossible to see it, a target out there at 26,000 yards, right? Plus, you got big waves. Now, I know from when you have a big storm, you have to attenuate your feedback, right? Cut everything down because you're mostly just getting waves. Now, you're not seeing a tiny torpedo boat. The waves are probably bigger than a torpedo boat. Okay, so in a storm, so you should have questioned this. They should have questioned this right away, but they're jacked up on adrenaline, right? So this is very suspect here, um, uh, you know, and then the big waves had an effect upon sonar. So when you had big waves, the boat is rocking up and down, right? The bow's going up, right? Then it's going down, and the stern's going up, right? And the propellers are going shallow in the water. When the propellers go shallow, they give off a high-pitched sound that is similar to the sound of torpedo props, right? Plus, you got a sonarman who probably has never heard torpedo in the water, right? So the reports of a second attack were based upon were based upon the sonarman saying torpedoes in the water, right? So when they did that, they lit up their searchlights. They started firing their guns randomly all around, trying to hit something out there they didn't see, what, right? And then they called in an airstrike, and the same guy right here, this guy right here, again, he's like a superhero at the Naval Academy. He's like super respected, right? You see that medal around his neck? That's a Medal of Honor, right? And he got this from doing like incredible stuff in as a prisoner of war in these these bad Vietnamese in prison camps where they torture them like crazy. He's just a solid guy, right? He's leading this flight, right? So he led the first one. This is when they attacked the torpedo boats, right? They got some hits on it, right? No hits with Zunis, but now he's leading the second one, right? He flies in, and this is what he says, quote, "I had the best seat in the house to watch that event, and our destroyers were just shooting at phantom targets. There were no PT boats there. There was nothing but black water and American firepower," right? So first-hand witness, flying this plane over there, nothing out there, right? All right. So I know that this is a debatable point. So, no matter all the other sound facts I gave you is, no matter how undeniable we set up and provoke this, right? Liars will want to shift all focus onto the one point that they can have a chance on, and then try to make it, appear that everything hinges upon that. So they'll try to make this debatable point, the main thing, right, and leave it as, well, it's totally forever debatable. So we can't say anything about Gulf of Tonkin. No, that's not true, right? I showed you how, well, I'll do a review and put it all together. All right, so okay, this is Lyndon Johnson's speech after the event. Now, he gave this speech about midnight, so this is like crossing over into the 5th in Washington time. He said, "My fellow Americans," he's addressing the whole nation here, right? "Renewed hostile actions against U.S. Navy ships," right? Renewed, so repeated, right? He emphasized repeated, right? The initial attack on destroyers, Maddox on the 2nd, was repeated by a number of hostile vessels. Number, well, you don't even know that it occurred. How do you know there's a number? Repeated attacks of violence again, right? And he says it must be met with alert defense, but also with a reply, right? And they sent a reply with a bombing attack on North Vietnam on the 5th, right? So air reaction is now in execution against gunboats, right? So they bombed them. In a larger sense, this new act of aggression, right, aimed directly at our own forces, again brings home to all of us in the United States the importance of the struggle for peace and security in Southeast Asia. Man, we cooked this whole thing up, right? We're trying to keep the peace here. We Americans know, although others appear to forget, the risk of spreading conflict We still seek no wider war. What were they saying in all their documents? We need to expand the war, put troops on the ground, and we need a congressional resolution to do this. So here's how he talks about the congressional resolution. Finally, I have today met with the leaders of both parties in the Congress of the United States and have informed them that I shall immediately request the Congress to pass a resolution making it clear that our government is united in a determination to take all necessary measures in support of freedom and in defense of peace in Southeast Asia. All right. So here is the cell. Here is how they packaged it. Now, the war resolution is in reality a hot little ticket to war. It's authorizing the president to use military force. It is carte blanche, right? Wage as big a war as you want, as long as you want, until you pass another law stopping it, right? So now he's saying the reason is, well, we got to show unity, by Congress passing this, right? The whole reason is we got to show that we're not a house divided, right? That the legislature and the executive are not divided, right? So don't mess with us, right? Because we're together on this. And then he says we're doing this to protect freedom. This is always a great buzzword. This sells to Americans all the time. And then it's for peace. We're defending freedom and peace, right? And then he says, I'm assured by leaders that it's going to pass with overwhelming support, and it did. 100% of House of Representative congressmen, all but 2 senators. That is massive, right? That's unprecedented type of stuff. But it is my considered conviction, shared throughout your government, that firmness in the right is indispensable today for peace. That firmness must always be in the mission of peace. So that's peace persona stuff. Here is peace. We're doing this for peace, right? You want to start a war, you got to feed that you're doing everything for peace. That is old technique. All right, so then it's voted on 100% of representatives. 88 out of 90 senators, right? Now the threat signals. Remember, I said, well, you gotta develop the perception of Americans in the opposite direction. So remember, I said you release the plan said to have a D-17, a time release of the modified Jordan report on communist aggression in the North. Sure enough, they released it on July 15th. That matches up exactly with D-17, right? Now, I say here that 97.3% of all captured Viet Cong weapons were U.S. weapons. This was up to 64, right? And those weapons were obtained. The primary sources were during the French Indochina War. Vietnam was a French colony for over 100 years prior to World War II. And then the Japanese moved in, and the Japanese abused the Vietnamese badly, right? Just taking food out of the country, and there was also famine. And so during World War II, 1 out of 4 North Vietnamese died of starvation. It was bad under Japanese rule. Then, the North Vietnamese, all of Vietnam is fighting. The Viet Minh were the main national fighters fighting the Japanese with Allied support. And World War II ends with the dropping of the bombs, right? Japan is defeated. Well, what happens? Great Britain and France go in and reimpose colonial rule, right? So then what they did is they disarmed the Viet Minh and rearmed the Japanese to help them control, right? So then that starts the French Indochina War. Well, who supplied the lion's share of the weapons? Like 95% of the weapons? U.S. So they're fighting with U.S. weapons, and when the Vietnamese defeated the French, well, they got all those weapons, right? It was basically World War II surplus weapons. And then another source of weapons was a program that was run. Chief guy in charge was Harriman. It was a strategic hamlet program in which you dump weapons into these villages. Well, that became a conduit for American weapons to the Viet Cong, right? So most of the weapons they had were American weapons. Anyways, that's off to the side. That's a sidebar. I should have. Hopefully, I didn't distract too much. Now, another thing on July 25th, front page headlines: Reds in Vietnam believed to plan major assault. You pump up Americans to expect a communist attack, and they're going to see it that way. All right, so what I want to show you is statements by American officials on how they can lie and deny that they conducted these attacks. They said we can conduct these attacks and do them in a way in which there's left no doubt in Ho Chi Minh's mind that we're behind this, right? We did this to you, right? And they'll have no way of proving it. We'll maintain what the terms they use is plausible deniability or maximum deniability. So we'll see a number of them use that terms on how we can do these attacks. First, I'll do is I'll talk about the response to the denial of the boat attacks and the air attacks. Right now, the only paper I found that covered this at all was the New York Times. Right, I looked at Chicago papers; they didn't have jack. Right, they didn't cover this at all. So I'm thinking, most other big city papers probably didn't cover this. Right, so really the only paper that would probably cover this, I'm guessing, is the New York Times, and this was like a tiny little cube. It was a small little blurb that I'm sure few people actually read. So no one knew that we attacked them, before this incident. It says here, quote, in another development affecting North Vietnam, the State Department denied, as without foundation, right, maximum deniability, Hanoi's charge of two separate United States attacks on North Vietnamese territory. Hanoi said yesterday that the United States planes based in Laos had attacked a North Vietnamese village near the Laotian frontier. I think they were actually Thai Air Force planes, right? And that American warships had shelled two North Vietnamese islands, Han Mai and Han Nu, in the Gulf of Tonkin. Well, those attacks did occur, right? All right. So now here's another example of denying the attacks and how we can deny it. This is from Foreign Relations of the United States, official U.S. government document source here, printed by the U.S. Government Printing Office, 1964. Memo prepared by Director of the CIA McComb, March 3rd. Quote, we could carry out dramatic operations against North Vietnam, those means attacks, theoretically non-attributable, well, we can deny them, right? But actually well identified as coming from South Vietnam with U.S. support, right? I mentioned here semiotic games. I'm not going to discuss that, right? How those games are conducted. But it basically is about manipulating perceptions, controlling perceptions with, differential information. So again, Foreign Relations of the United States, in a memo from Ambassador South Vietnam, Henry Cabot Lodge Jr., right, to Secretary of State Rusk, dated January 1st of 64. I pointed out operations envisioned would be publicly denied, though of course Ho Chi Minh would be left in no doubt as to what was happening and why. Right? Should GVN, that's government South Vietnam, and or U.S. eventually become publicly involved, our actions would be portrayed as self-defense against North Vietnamese aggressions. So we whack them, and if it gets out there, we say, well, we're just defending against their aggression. I believe this would be effectively done. I mean, yeah, that's easily done. Americans are going to believe that, right? They're not going to believe we attacked them, right? Okay, from a telegram, the CIA station chief in Saigon. So this is the Vietnamese top CIA guy in Vietnam. In reference, quote, in reference to covert operations, quote, our strong preference, therefore, is to maintain the maximum deniability on the part of ourselves in GVN as far as covert operations, right? Memo from Secretary of Navy Forrestal to McGeorge Bundy, the guy who wrote the 30-day plan here. Quote, U.S. commences unannounced air defense capabilities for Saigon and takes first overt military movements to prepare for possible escalation, such as fleet movement to provide whatever cover Joint Chief of Staff deemed necessary for air operations against North, right? Attacking the North with air. Some care should be taken, however, to avoid public appearance that U.S. is involved in GVN actions, right? All right. Now, this is from a book, Maitland, Secretary of Defense McNamara saying, quote, our Navy played absolutely no part in, was not associated with, was not aware of any South Vietnamese actions, if there were any. This is the fact, right? Well, you know what? The thing that's tricky about this is both true and it's a lie, right? Now, it's true that our Navy played no part in, right, these operations, right? But it's not true because these were totally directed by the United States, right? Planned by the United States, right? Now, it is true that our Navy did not know about these. For example, when the Maddox went up there, it didn't know, had no idea that those islands were attacked, right? They're being sent up there as like, you know, lambs to the wolves or whatever, right? Okay. All right, I'm gonna. All right. So let's do a review. All right. So here's the overall organizer. Recall that multiple administration officials said, "Hey, you know, we want to escalate the war, get U.S. troops on the ground. For that, we need a congressional resolution." And the first signs of the plan were on May 21st, when McGeorge Bundy said, "Hey, can we send threat signals, right, to create a situation, a crisis like the Cuban Missile Crisis?" You know, in the United States, of course, Soviet Union is portrayed as the perpetrators of this. You know, send threat signals. And then he comes up with a 30-day plan, and they're also drafting the resolution right away. Not after the incident here. Way back here, they're drafting the resolution, which is the ticket for war. All right. I'm going to take a break here. All right, so this is a summary of this lecture, this lesson. All right, again, this is the overall layout here. This is when they first proposed using threat signals. All these are threat signals, came in two big batches. Here's the first wave, second wave. All right. They also planned these threat signals with a 30-day plan, which is available to the public. And they also, at the same time, developed or the first draft of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which became the war legal basis for war. All right, so in the second batch of threat signals, they actually started attacking North Vietnam with commando raids. And then the big setup was here. We had two boat attacks on critical islands, one of which had a torpedo boat base. Then you send up a U.S. ship right to where those attacks occurred. And while the ship is steaming up, you have air attacks, two of them. One near the coast and one near the Laotian border, right? U.S. ship gets attacked, right? Runs out of there, sent back in the next day. And while there's two ships going up next day, and while they're steaming around, you have another boat attack. And there was believed to have been an attack based upon false information and based upon fear and too much adrenaline. And but nonetheless, Johnson used that to bomb North Vietnam, and then have the congressional resolution passed, which became the sole legal basis for the Vietnam War. Right. All right. So here's the summary. Here's the McGeorge Bundy statement during the meeting on May 21st. Quote, he believed that a major factor in the 1962 Cuban crisis had been the major movement of U.S. forces in Southeast U.S. Moscow knew something was coming. He wanted to know if any such visible signs would accompany the alerting actions of Op Plan 37 which is the overt operations, or if they would not, was the plan flexible enough to permit them to do so? So he wants to send the same type of signals that caused the Cuban Missile Crisis. So Bundy is essentially saying, hey, threat signals caused the Cuban Missile Crisis, making the Soviets look like the aggressors. Can we do the same thing with North Vietnam? All right. Now, this proves intent to use threat signals. This is absolute proof. Can we do it? Right? It's intent to induce another Cuban Missile Crisis type of incident. And then immediately thereafter, well, it's really 2 days, but that's damn fast, right? Bundy produces both a 30-day plan full of threat signals, which they did most of, and as far as I know, they did all of them. There's some I didn't know they did, but I don't know. They could have done. And the first draft of a congressional resolution, right? This is going way back here. Most people thought the resolution was drafted up in response to the action here. Right? No, they're getting this thing ready way back here. All right, so let's see. Almost every item on the 30-day plan is conducted, every threat signal sent, and they did much more than was on the plan. So with full intention, they blatantly announce in the press they're going to send multiple shiploads of weapons to Vietnam or nearby stockpiles, including heavy weapons like tanks, jet bombers, and fighter jets. So they're blabbing it to the world, making sure the Vietnamese know, the North Vietnamese know they're coming. This is part of the 30-day plan. We give wide publicity to the opening of a strategic network of 5 air bases. You open up 5 air bases with U.S. Air Force pilot flown jets, right? You're preparing for something. You're building up. Blab that to the world. Top administration officials repeatedly declare that we are going to attack or invade North Vietnam. I mean, not just underlings, right? Not just secretaries of state or defense, right? This is president, right? Including President Johnson twice. But when he said it, of course, he said, with peace persona, right? Well, for the sake of peace, we're doing this, right? That always has to be maintained if you're planning to start a war. And freedom is another thing he used in his address to Congress for the resolution, right? Man, this always, you use the word freedom, that always gets Americans. They eat that stuff up. This creates an atmosphere of fearful expectancy, right? That is likely to give the Vietnamese, here are triggers, right? A perfect condition to manufacture an incident, right? You get them all jacked up with fear. So they have a big concerted campaign to build fear. We reveal we have plans to invade North Vietnam through Congressman Laird. We show North Vietnam classic war signals, right? We switch to military leadership from civilian. Recall dependent. We recall dependence out of the danger zone, out of harm's way here, right? That was on the 30-day plan. Now again, I don't know if this was actually done. It was on the plan, so I don't know. I'll leave that open. We attacked North Vietnam, sending commandos on sabotage missions inside the country, and then we brag about it. Colonel Key bragged about it, how we can do more of the same and far worse, right? Talking about large-scale bombing attacks by the air, right? Okay. Now, these attacks are scheduled on a 30-day plan. We launch 2 boat attacks on North Vietnamese islands. All right. This is on July 31st, Han May, Han Nu. Right after that, 8 hours after the USS Maddox, totally, innocent of what happened here. They don't know what's going on, except they see the boats coming back, right? Captain Herrick reported that he saw the boats coming back. He knew something went on up here, right? But they're sent up here, the analogy I use is you want to play a dirty game on a kid, right? Say, hey, why don't you come over and play catch? And then right before he comes over, you whack hornet's nest you know of with a baseball bat. Then you're playing catch. You say, hey, why don't you go stand? And then you throw it over his head so it goes towards the hornet's nest. He goes over there and he gets, stung by swarms of hornets, whatever. Well, that's essentially the same thing they're doing here. Um, so you whack these islands, then you send the ship right where you attacked, right? And then as you're going up there, you have air attacks. 2 air attacks, one here at whatever, I forget the names of these places. Right? Then one near the Laotian border here. Um, uh, okay, so now the commander of the Soda mission, Captain Herrick, intercepts North Vietnamese radio traffic that they feared the Maddox was part of the same attack mission, and that they were going to attack the Maddox. So he runs away, but he's ordered back to Han Mei, which we had bombed with over 750 cannon rounds, and which had a torpedo boat base. So Maddox is 3 torpedo boats come out, and they attack the Maddox, but it escapes to the south. But it is immediately, 5 hours later, 5 hours later, not 4. It's sent back in with another ship, the USS Turner Joy. The 2 ships go back in, right? As they're steaming about, skirting past Han Mei twice. We conduct another boat attack on this place here, Vin San, or whatever it's called. Base there. So let's see here. Now, overnight, a storm blew in. You got a high sea state, and as they're coming around here, they zoomed out here. They believe that they're under attack, right? Under conditions which you could not have known whether or not there's ships out there at that range, right? I seen radar scopes in stormy weather, and man, it's just a mess. How you can see anything, I don't know, right? All right, now certainly not at 26,000 yards range, right? Okay, so an airstrike's called in. They think they hear torpedo props in the water. They call it an airstrike. The airstrike is led by Admiral Stockdale. He reports that there were no boats out there, only black water and American firepower. Shooting at phantom targets, he said. About midnight, Captain Herrick reports that the attack is now doubtful. Johnson gives a midnight national address. That's midnight Washington time. So that's, what is that? Probably about 10 hours or so after, maybe 12 hours. I don't know. I'm not sure how long after. Anyways, okay. So he gives a midnight address, emphasizing repeated attacks. Repeated attacks means a pattern, right? He uses buzzwords like for peace. We're doing this for peace, right? We're doing this for freedom. It all sells, right? And he sells a resolution saying this is going to show that we are not a country divided, that our government is not divided. We are a unified front, all right, able to withstand any threats to us. So this resolution is showing that, but little do people know that this is a hot little ticket to war, right? And it justifies the whole Vietnam War. It's amazing that congressmen fell for it again during the Iraq, build up for the Iraq War. It's like they learned nothing. Congressional resolution becomes the legal basis for an 11-year war. Multiple administration officials had stated in meetings that they needed a congressional resolution to expand the war beyond 15,000 advisors and put conventional troops on the ground in Vietnam. Now, I only gave you 2 guys, right? But, man, you had multiple guys saying this, right? I only gave you McNamara and McCone. But, I did this research back in 92 or 93. But I remember there were like a half dozen guys saying, hey, we need to have a dramatic event to get a congressional resolution, right? So they say a number of administration officials said that as soon as where there's a dramatic event, we'll go for a resolution. Now, Director McCone said he reminded everyone that the first discussion of the congressional resolution was in terms of we attacking Vietnam first, right? And when they respond to our attack upon them, we use their reaction to justify a congressional resolution to Congress. Now, is that not exactly what was done? Exactly what Director McCone said, right? Can you debate about that? Can you create? I mean, I don't know how people trust anything to you know distort and all right. So multiple administration officials are on record stating how they could launch covert secret attacks on Vietnam, making sure Ho Chi Minh knows exactly who's doing this and why, and yet have maximum or plausible deniability. Right? I read you those statements by these officials, how they said they can do this. So here are the outcomes. The multiple cognitive framework game worked. North Vietnamese perception was built up to expect an attack by the U.S. American public perception was built up to expect an attack by communists. Then, when they manufactured an incident, they totally manufactured that incident. When it occurred, both sides saw the other as the aggressor, and thus we got a congressional resolution, and we got a long, bloody war lasting 11 years. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution used euphemistic language. You know, it's just authorizing the president to use military force, sold to Congress and the public by the president as, you know, hey, listen, this is just showing that we are not a house divided, that we are unified. We have a unified front. Don't mess with us. It's deterrence. But in reality, it was a blank check for war. It was carte blanche. Now, who voted for this? 100% of congressmen in the House. All but 2 senators voted for this. Senator Gruning and Senator Morris. Senator Gruning was from Arkansas, I believe. Senator Morris was from Oregon. Morris was very astute. I think he was a political science professor before he became a senator. He said, I'll just kind of like paraphrase what he said. He said a couple things which became prophetic. He said, "Hey, listen, right? This is a predated declaration of war. Don't tell me that this you know is just a warning, right? This is a declaration of war." And then he said, "This is going to involve U.S. boys in a long, protracted war in Southeast Asia. A lot of boys are going to die, right?" In both cases, he was right. So there's like just 2 guys. Everyone else had their heads up their butt. I swear, right? President Johnson's approval ratings exploded overnight. He was low. He was Donald Trump low, you know, maybe lower than Donald Trump. He was low 30%, right? And he jumped overnight to 65% approval rate overnight, right? And in fact, Secretary of State Russ, remember the Honolulu meeting I told you about, the June 10th meeting? At that same meeting, Russ said this. He said, "Hey, listen, we get a dramatic event that will cause a rally around the president, and his approval rating is going to go up." And sure enough, it did. It's predictable. Every time you have a major threat, right? You know, urgency. What do people do? They rally around the flag. They rally around the leader, right? That's predictable human behavior. Johnson campaigned on a peace ticket, all the while they're preparing for war. And this is an old trick that goes back hundreds of years to European wars. I mentioned to you Franco-Prussian War. They did this, and wars of Italian unification. I saw this done, right? You make sure that the head of state appears to the public like they're doing everything for peace, right? Did Johnson do this? Yeah, right? Everything was for peace. 2 months later, Johnson won the election in a landslide, right? So they controlled human and material resources. Oh, this is my notes from sociology, right? Knowledge is power. Got the war, won the election, right? Exact same thing happened again in the Iraq War, right? Got the war, you stole the election. Remember they said they could steal the November election. Karl Rove, you know. Now, you know, I saw this happening from the get-go, right? I told you how when they released the intelligence report saying Iraq can have a nuclear weapon in a matter of months on September 9th, 2 days before the 1 year anniversary, as soon as they released that, my radar went up, right? Warning bells went off. And I said, something's in play. They're gonna do something to get a war here, right? So I saw it. Now, in my estimate, I'm willing to bet that no one else saw it. Who else in this country from that point, that one thing saw it? I saw it. Now, is that because I'm super exceptionally smart? No, right? I did the work though. I did the research. I figured out what's going on, right? And as soon as I saw this pattern. They did it before with that Jordan report. I knew that something was in play, and sure enough, it proved out to be true. Um, History repeats itself. Why? Because no one learned from history. No one remembers, right? It's just like I don't want to say, but it's like dazed and confused. Uh, uh, okay, so here's a mention of how this will be attacked in a couple days. All right, I don't know. I go through the methods here, but it's going to get a big social reality boost here. Right? Oh, these are elements of salience. Remember I talked about salience, right? Um, here's social realities, right? Social reality is only one of the many elements of salience. If it gets social support, people take it as true, right? It can be totally a joke. Um, okay, so this is just an appetizer. I want to talk about some of the guys involved here, like McGeorge Bundy, Averill Harriman, huge, right? William Bundy, right? All these guys in gray are all from the same power club, right? All these guys are directly involved in the wars we fight, and they profit off the wars we fight. Here's Halliburton going back to Dresser Industries. That's Prescott Bush. He was director. George W. Bush worked for it. It's owned by W. A. Harriman Banking. The CEO is Neil Malman. All these guys from the same power group. Who's part of Harriman Banking? All these bonesmen here, right? Um, that's just a taste. And this is a more detailed depiction of how they're all related to each other. They intermarry, they grow up together, they go to the same schools and have same businesses and so forth. All right, so that's something else to come. Um, so that's how we got the Vietnam War, right? Now, once again, you know, last thing I'll say is Americans tend to think that America does not fight a lot of wars. We fight 2.77 wars every year of our existence, right? A lot of people, Americans think the U.S. did not start wars. Man, we start the lion's share of almost all these wars we start, right? Especially against American Indians. Um, and I'll go. Like I said, I'm going through a number of wars that we start, which most people think we did start. So again, the Vietnam War. This is how we started it.